my friends, and welcome to Traversal. This is yet another game that was suggested to me on my Discord DMs, and once again, I really need to start saving these so that way I can actually give credit to the people who asked me to play them. So, to the one person who suggested this game, sorry, but I played it. Anyways, this is an interesting game because it's incredibly well made, but has some seriously huge crippling flaws that make me kind of hesitant to recommend it, and I can't tell if some of those flaws were just a direct result of me being not very good at stealth games, all things considered, or if they were legitimate problems. So I'm sure, as usual, people will go into the comments section after I say anything negative and defend things to the death, but please, if you're going to do that when it comes to this game, actually explain yourself instead of skill issue, you suck, get good, because I got plenty of that on the Guts and Black Powder video, which I almost don't even want to talk about. Regardless, what is Traversal? Well, it's a predominantly single player, although you can play it multiplayer stealth game that relies on sound, distractions, and shadows in order to take out enemies and progress through the levels. It's relatively short, with me being able to complete the entire thing in about an hour, so if you have an hour to spare, I think I can comfortably recommend this game. That being said, I can get it out of the way right off the bat that this game should not have taken me an hour. And that's because the first 4 levels of the game took me 20 minutes. And then the last level of the game took me 40 minutes. This stems from the last level of the game being horrendous. It's just poorly designed, and I don't know what the fuck they were thinking. Seriously. Like, I have so much good things to say about this game, and I feel like it's hard to even grasp those now that I've played the final level. I just have to be like, what were they thinking here? But we'll get to the final level. Let's make that the last thing that we talk about. The mechanics in Traversal are pretty straightforward, and they're well explained to you in a very minimalistic fashion. You can pick up 3 different items in the game: primary weapons, secondary weapons, and distractions. One of the primary and one of the secondary weapons has a secondary function. The knife allows you to open locked doors, and the crowbar allows you to open chain-locked doors. I think that this could have introduced a really interesting dynamic if all of the weapons in the game had separate uses, but as far as I could tell playing through the whole game, these are the only 2, and because of the way that combat is completely useless, which we'll be talking about in a second, there's no reason to pick up anything other than a crowbar or a knife if you can. Anyways, in terms of stealth, this once again is not exactly rocket science. There are shadowed areas and unshadowed areas. If you're in a shadowed area and an NPC doesn't already know where you are, you're pretty much invisible, a la Origami, if any of you guys have seen my video on that. If you're not in the shadows, then enemies can see you from very far distances away. Probably too far in my opinion, but we'll get there. Sound also plays a factor. If you're running, the enemies will start to detect you, as well as if you're walking on wooden planks. If you're not directly sneaking, which is a bind in of itself in the game, then the enemies will be able to hear you, turn around, and aggro onto you. If you sneak up behind an enemy, a little red circle will pop up, and if you attack them when the red circle is there, it's an instant kill. Now, if you do get detected by the enemies, that's where things kind of sort of fall apart. There is a combat system in the game, although it's pretty obvious that you're not supposed to use it, which partly makes me wonder why it's really even there to begin with, but regardless, you're able to both attack and parry enemies. The parry timing is pretty lenient, so as long as you see an enemy start an attack and you press the parry button, you usually won't take damage. The sort of major problem here, though, is the fact that throughout my whole playthrough, I never killed an enemy in open combat. Not one. I don't know if you can kill an enemy in open combat, and it's very, very, very clear that it would take you an eternity if you wanted to kill every single enemy in open combat. Obviously, it's a stealth game, so you're not expected to constantly fight enemies, but I found it kind of weird that the combat system is so punishing. And so what this ends up leading you to is, obviously, if you get caught, you want to break their aggro as soon as possible. And the way you break their aggro is usually relatively straightforward. You run away from them, you find some sort of piece of hard cover that has a shadow near it, and if you're in that for long enough and out of their line of sight, they'll basically just completely forget that you were ever there. The problem is that the gameplay dynamic that this causes is just sort of awkward. If you're sneaking up on an enemy and they catch you and they aggro a bunch of their friends over there, obviously the best course of action is to dip and run away. But in my opinion, if you were getting caught by a singular guard and no one else shows up, there should be at least some scenarios where it would make sense to fight back. But no, every single time that you get caught, you're running away. That's just the way it is. I also found it interesting that there was only one point in the entire game that I found a healing item, and that was in the very last mission of the game. This means that for the most part, unless there are a lot of these hidden about and I somehow missed all of them, the damage that you take is effectively permanent. Dying is really not that massive of a blow, but it does feel bad if you go through 2 or 3 levels and then die in one hit because you've been slowly accumulating damage. I don't really know why they couldn't refill your health whenever you go through one of these blue doors that effectively indicates you're going to a new level, but that's just not how it works. And finally, the last little mechanic that I haven't quite talked about is the distractions. And these things are seemingly a bit of a buggy mess. The distraction item instantly throws the second that you press the 3 key on your keyboard, and it throws it towards the center of your camera. If you throw a distraction, obviously if there's an enemy nearby, they'll go towards it. The problem with these distractions is they seemingly don't work the way they do in most other stealth games, where an enemy will go towards the distraction and then wait there for a little bit. At least in my experience, I would throw distractions, the enemy would come over, look for a second, and then just randomly turn in a direction. So it feels a lot more random than it otherwise probably should. Generally speaking, a lot of the time I found it better to try to aggro enemies directly to me and then break line of sight in a shadow and then kill them than to actually use the distraction mechanic, which just looks and feels dumb. Anyways, now that we've finished talking about all of the baseline mechanics, good lord, we have to talk about this final level, because it is horrific. You start right behind a wall with 2 shadows on either side, and there's 2 enemies guarding the door. There is no way that you're getting through this door without aggroing these enemies. How would you do it? Even if you threw 2 distractions, they're right there. They're going to see you. So already we're off to an awkward start, because you need to piss these guys off, play Ring Around the Rosie until you break aggro, and then kill them both. Whatever, not super difficult, we move forward. You go through this door and there's this big ass camera. It sweeps back and forth. It's not super difficult to get past, but if you do trigger it, a bunch of enemies will run out into the room. If you trigger it, well, we've been over this. You can't fight. So what does that mean? Leading all of these guys back to the 2 shadows earlier, because as far as I could tell, there were no convenient shadows in this room, and you cheese them out that way. So now you're past the camera and you're given 2 paths that you can go, left or right, as well as the path here being made of wood, which means you need to sneak the whole time. This area is a fucking disaster. It's filled with enemies, and there are basically 0 shadows, even though there are shadows everywhere. Seriously, this looks like a shadow, right? It isn't. How about this one? Does this look like a shadow? It's not. Like, what the fuck is happening here? I genuinely do not understand how this happened. The game had a pile of QA testers. They're right here at the end of the game. Did none of them notice the fact that the final level's shadows just were incredibly inconsistent? I don't know, but it sucks. Like I said, this level took me 40 minutes, and at the end of the day, what I ended up doing is effectively dragging every single enemy that I found, which would inevitably aggro me, all the way back to the first room so I could kite them around the pillars and kill them. It's hilarious because when you get this many bodies in here, the AI starts to have a heart attack because it just doesn't know how to pathfind when there's this many bodies. It just boggles my mind that this whole level is basically a perfect representation of what would have happened if the rest of the game had poor shadow management, but it doesn't. If the distraction mechanic worked better, this would also probably alleviate this issue to some extent, but again, it doesn't. The final sort of kick in the balls here is these guys that sit down. they just won't get up until they hear something or get mad at something. Usually, well, you. Look at this. I throw a distraction and he doesn't give a fuck. Why? It makes absolutely no sense. So clearly the only way past this guy is to piss him off and then kite him back to somewhere else and then kill him. Because if I tried to fight him here, I wouldn't be able to kill him because the combat mechanics basically don't work. And even if I did succeed at fighting him, he's probably gonna end up aggroing a whole bunch of other enemies over here. So it's a lost cause. The only way is to kite him all the way back to the beginning. I just don't get it, and it's a travesty that this game ruins itself in the last 40 minutes, maybe for time, I guess? That's really my best assumption here. Regardless of the final level, the game as a whole is not bad. It's clear that a fair amount of work went into it, the animations are really good, the sound design is relatively good, although I think they could have used a sound effect or something when you get detected just so it's a little bit more clear, but regardless, it's not bad. If you want to give this game a go, as usual, I'll be linking the game in the description of the video, so you can check it out there. But with all that, I'm pretty much done here. If you enjoyed the video or found it informative, you can of course leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, don't. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.